Welcome to today's webinar. My name is Connor Judge. I'm a manager of cities here at the Deepening Communities team, and it is my absolute pleasure to be welcoming everyone to this webinar. Before we begin, I'd just like to start with a land acknowledgement. So we begin this workshop by acknowledging that we are meeting on Indigenous lands. As settlers, we are grateful for the opportunity to meet, and we thank all the generations of Indigenous peoples who have taken care of this land. As settlers, this recognition of the contributions and historic importance of Indigenous peoples must be clearly and overtly connected to our collective commitment to make the promise and the challenge of truth and reconciliation real in our communities. I am joining from Toronto, colonially known as Toronto. This land is the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. By acknowledging these lands and their original stewards, I am trying to position myself, a white settler, within the social, historical, political context embedded within the lands known as Canada, and am commemorating Indigenous peoples' principal kinship to the land. So please, within the chat box, you have shared where you're joining us from. Please share again, what lands are you joining us from? And I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Heather now.
Hello, everybody. I do have some bad news. We are having some technical difficulties and we can't seem to connect with Margaret Wheatley. And so what we thought is we're going to take this time to still have our discussion. So over to you, Justin.
Thank you, Heather. So yes, welcome everybody to today's webinar, Thinking Like a System and Leading with Humility. My name is Justin Williams and I manage stakeholder relations with Tamarack. So today's webinar is about shifting the way we think about complex problems, and so that we can provide new forms of leadership. And we actually envisioned this webinar a few months ago, once Mayor Helps put out a really excellent blog about the challenges facing communities and the different approaches to leadership that was needed to address things like climate change, loneliness, and polarization. And I think the last couple of months have really shown us how desperately needed these kind of conversations and these new ways of thinking and reconnecting are for us all. And so I'm really excited to have Mayor Helps here. I didn't get a chance to say this before to you, Mayor Helps, but whenever we have we're going to bring on a mayor, I'm like, have you thought about Mayor Helps? Because I've had the chance to see you a few times, and I'm always thinking that we get to hear some brilliant thoughts, and so happy to have this for today. And this webinar is brought to you by Deepening Community. With the growing sense of disconnection and social isolation, I can't even talk today, happening in cities and towns across Canada, we believe that deepening community is the answer. So we use an asset-based community development approach, can combine that with collective impact to support neighborhoods, towns, and cities to build their knowledge and skills to develop neighborhood strategies. As a brief introduction, I'm really happy to give a little intro to Mayor Helps. So Mayor Helps works hard at the City Hall in Victoria, BC, and in the community to ensure that the city is prosperous, affordable, and sustainable, and ready for the future. Taking a long-term, big picture perspective, she looks both around the city and around the world for innovative solutions to the pressing challenges facing us, including climate change, lack of affordable housing, and growing social isolation and loneliness, especially among youth and seniors. Mayor Helps believes that the best way to address complex challenges is to bring people from a diversity of backgrounds, perspectives, and experiences together to truly listen to each other. In her experience, listening deeply with empathy and generosity and taking in new information can enable us to change our minds, or at least broaden our perspectives. And so I'm really excited for this conversation. And I'm gonna, I think, try to kick it off first with the first sort of question of, for Mayor Helps, if you can think a little bit about how systems thinking can help us see the connections and ways for addressing these broader challenges, if that's a first big question to get us started.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you, Justin, and welcome everyone. I was saying to these folks as we were anxiously awaiting Margaret Wheatley's arrival that 95% of the people on the call probably came to hear from her, and we will. I commit to taking some time, and we'll have that conversation and get it out to all of you. And I will answer your question in just a moment, Justin. But I too want to situate myself on the Lekwungen lands here in the city of Victoria. These are the lands of the Lekwungen speaking people. They're known today as the Songhees and the Esquimalt nations. And I really appreciated the in-depth land acknowledgement that was done at the beginning of this webinar, because acknowledging the land is more than just a perfunctory sentence that we put in front of our public speaking. It's really important for a couple of reasons, and many of us know that, but I always want to reflect on this when I'm acknowledging the lands, particularly in a very public setting like this one, that we acknowledge the lands to note and reflect on the fact that even after everything that has happened, even after all of the atrocities of colonization, that in my case here, the Lekwungen people are still here. And not only are they still here, but they are thoughtful and generous. And really here in the city of Victoria, we're walking a very deep path of reconciliation with the two nations on whose homelands the city was built. So I really wanted to just honor them and honor the lands as a way of beginning. So now to the question of thinking like a system. This is something that Margaret Wheatley has been doing and others have been doing for many decades. And it requires us to look at, and again, please do go and read my blog, because I'll say it here, but probably it's a little bit better written down, that when we're thinking about all of the challenges facing us right now in communities, in our country and around the world, the big things like climate change, like decolonization, like a labor shortage, like a housing shortage, like the isolation that we're all experiencing coming out of COVID, thinking about these issues as isolated events, I think doesn't allow us to address them in the way that we can if we think about how they're all connected. And what Margaret Wheatley suggested, I'm just going to channel her for a moment. And this connects also to the neighborhood level event that Heather was just talking about. So what she suggests in terms of systems thinking is this big complex thing. There's a lot of theory around it, but in practice, in our neighborhoods, in our jobs, in our communities, in our schools, in our workplaces, it's actually not that complex. And so what she suggests is, when we're trying to make change using a systems approach, is that we see a system as a web of connections, and we can see that web as big or as small as we want, depending on the context in which we work. And that when we're trying to make change, any kind of change at all, to start small and to do something that makes a difference and see who notices. And so at the neighborhood level, that might be putting a book box in front of your house and seeing what kind of traffic that creates in front of your place, what kind of people come by who may not have stopped, who's talking in front of your house that may not have talked, just see who notices. At the city level, it might be putting in a new community garden or a community center or a playground in a neighborhood where more marginalized people live, and see what connections are made. And I could go up in scale, but I won't. I think you get the point. So do something, start with something small and see who notices. And then once you see that, the whole point of doing these small things is to find the connections in the system that we don't know are there. And so what Margaret Wheatley says is that when we do something like that, when we take some small action in the direction that we want the world or our street or community or neighborhood to move in, people show up. And I think anyone who's involved in community development, city building, people want to show up. They want a reason to come. And what she says, and what's important in terms of thinking like a system, is that we didn't know that there was any connection between us, but the response to the small intervention makes it clear. And then we can understand and use those connections better and help to take the next action. Justin, that's a really long-winded response, but may I just give one more example, a real live example from here in the city?
Sure.
And so during the pandemic, we put out a series of grant programs to help people. And one of the things that came back most was a real focus on food security and food insecurity. And so we gave out lots of grants to community organizations. But what we also did is repurposed some of our growing space in the city's nursery and grew vegetable starts for people in the community who wouldn't otherwise be able to afford them to grow in their gardens. And it just started out as like a grow a seedling program. And so we grew 80,000 seedlings and we gave them away, but that leveraged a whole lot of community energy around the distribution of the plants, working with First Nations. Community centers got involved. indigenous or newcomer communities got involved. People started creating their own garden, like temporary garden beds that could then be taken and distributed elsewhere. So again, a small thing. All we did was grew lettuce and tomatoes and broccoli, and it really galvanized a whole community to mobilize and get food into people's hands. And now the pandemic we're coming out the other side, but we're continuing the Get Growing Victoria program. We're doing 100,000 seedlings this year. And anyway, so that's an example of thinking like a system. Food systems are very easy to think about, of course, but that could be used as a metaphor in other places and other ways as well.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic. And I think one of the next questions that I was going to go to is changing from that thinking about the individual to collective, because I think a lot of our responses to how we've addressed the pandemic have been very focused on the individual and the individual responsibility rather than that collective and the community piece. From your sort of take as a civil leader, can you think of other ways that those in positions of leadership can help to reshape conversations to be more about the collective and to help people see past the individual towards that broader sense? And I think that example right there is it, because you said it was small, but it's such a big thing, right? Because it starts to think about the collective rather than the individual. So can you just think of other examples in that sort of vein?
Sure. And I'm assuming that since I'm the only quote unquote panelist, that I can just give a bit of a long answer starting.
Absolutely.
Okay, perfect. That's great. That's great. Thanks, Justin. Because I want to, before I answer the question, I want to reflect on this notion of individualism and also freedom. And I'm going to be very political in a moment and talk about the freedom convoys and how I think that's a real problem. And I think and I mentioned this at the beginning, there are many crises that we're facing right now. There's the war that's happening in the Ukraine, that's top of mind for all of us, but there's climate change, and we've seen, particularly in British Columbia, but around the world, the catastrophic events that we're facing. There's a real spread between a growing gap in wealth and in equity in our cities and in our communities. There's a work of decolonization. There's the work of anti-racism. There's all of these big issues, and they're all really important. And what I think is, I don't want to say at the root of all of it, but what I think is one of the biggest challenges of our time, and one of the most difficult to grapple with, because it's not just about getting off of fossil fuels, is this notion of individualism, of fragmentation, of isolation, and I think the biggest problem of our time is that we don't know how to have conversations anymore. We actually can't speak in an open-hearted way with people who have very different opinions from us. And I think that unless we figure, and this does go to the question of individual versus collective, and I'll get there, but unless we figure that out, unless we figure out how to have a conversation with somebody who has a very divergent point of view, unless we go into those conversations in an open-hearted way, we're gonna be completely stuck. And that's what keeps me up at night. That is what I worry about. Of course, I worry about climate change. Of course, I worry about housing affordability. Of course, I worry about inclusion and reconciliation. But what really keeps me up at night is, how do we have those conversations that take us from our rooted individual positions to a sense that we're part of a collective? And not only part of a collective with like-minded people who all like to grow food, but that we're part of a collective with people who are very, very different than we are. And I just, if Margaret Wheatley was here, I know she'd go on and on about this, because it's something that she's really passionate about. And I want to read, I was going to read this to her and ask her to reflect, but I want to read it to all of you. It's from this book called Finding Our Way, Leadership for an Uncertain Time. And what she says, and this is really important, she says, our natural state is to be together. In this time when we keep moving away from each other, we haven't lost the need and the longing to be in relationship. Everybody has a story. If no one listens, we tell it to ourselves and we go mad. In the English language, the word for health comes from the same root as the word whole. We can't be healthy if we're not in relationship. And whole is from the same root as the word holy. Listening moves us closer. It helps us to become more whole, more healthy, more holy. And so how do we move from the individual to the collective? There are lots of projects and ways, and I can give you some concrete examples. But again, I really want to turn back to Margaret Wheatley and back to a practice that I've put in place since I read this book. And I'm going to encourage all of you here to try and do this practice. It's very difficult, but it really does build us from isolated individuals rooted in our own points of view to part of a community, even when and especially when it feels hard. So I'm going to tell you what she says, and then I'm going to show you my little prop that I carry around in my wallet, and we'll see what you think. And since there's only one of me and one of Justin, we are going to have some time for Q&A and reflection. So what she says is, I would like, and this is the answer, I think, to how do we move from individual to collective. She says, I'd like to encourage us all to play our part in the great healing that needs to occur everywhere. Think about who you might approach, someone you don't know, don't like, or whose manner of living is a mystery to you. What would it be like to begin a conversation with that person? Would you be able to ask him or her for an opinion or explanation, and then sit quietly and listen to the answer? Could you keep yourself from arguing or defending or saying anything for a while? Could you encourage the person to just keep telling you his or her version of things, that one side of the story? And I can tell you, it is really hard to do that. I made a little cue card for myself and I keep it in my wallet. It says the great healing that needs to take place everywhere. And then I've turned her paragraph into some points to remember. And it's really difficult to ask someone who has a different point of view and then just sit there and listen and not argue back, and even not argue back in your head. Because if you're arguing back in your head, you're not actually listening. But I've done this a number of times, and it's really difficult. But what it makes me feel is that even somebody who has a different point of view, and often it's about really contentious issues like housing or land use or reconciliation, I don't necessarily go away with my mind changed, but I go away feeling much closer and much more open-hearted towards somebody who thinks and feels differently than I do. And that's, I think, part of how we move from the individual to the collective. It's easy to build collectives with people we agree with. It's easy to build collectives with people who we share a common purpose. If we're going to solve the massive challenges facing us, we need to build collectives with people with whom we don't like or we don't understand.
Yeah, I fully agree. And I think one of the piece, I'm going to quickly jump in where I wouldn't normally jump in because we have the chance here, but part of my background is actually in studying ideologies. And part of that, I had the pleasure of studying under Thomas Homer Dixon, and the idea that as people become people increase their sense of disempowerment, they increase in their radicalization and their strongly held individual sort of beliefs. And I think part of what the advantage of working at the community level and with those smaller changes and having those kind of conversations where you sit back and you listen, is that it can make people who are doing the talking also feel empowered and open up those other conversations. So I think it has that dual capacity where by showing people that we can listen to each other, they can feel a greater sense of connection, but also of empowerment, which I think is actually really important for the conversation too. So I think that's such a great piece. So yeah, I think that's fantastic. And I'm going to prompt, because I think you said you wanted to say something a little bit more political.
I forgot.
So I don't want to, if you wanted to go into that, I'll open it up in case you wanted to.
Well, I just, this whole, I actually, I don't know if I need to, but yeah, I mean, the freedom convoys, it's like freedom for who? I want my individual freedom to do what I want in the world as an individual. And it wholly throws aside the collective. And I think when the notion of, obviously the notion of freedom is a really, really important one. But I think those kinds of movements, the relentless horn honking, and we have them every weekend here now in Victoria, and there's a big one coming again this weekend. And again, I agree with you. Maybe it's because the people who are doing their horn honking and the protesting and the occupation of Ottawa and other places don't feel heard. And so maybe I've already addressed that. Maybe it's worth going down to the legislature this weekend and seeing if someone will get out of their truck and come for a cup of coffee with me and listen to their story. So maybe I'll do that. So I think that's enough. And so I saw someone in the chat mentioned Adam Kahane. There's a lot of folks. Adam Kahane is someone. William Isaacs is another who've really written in depth about dialogue. There's a lot of resources for this really simple thing we should be able to do as humans.
I'm going to ask a couple more questions, and then we're getting some Q&A, so I'll turn to those in a second. But and I think you've sort of said this throughout, because I was going to ask about the types of leadership, but I think what I'm interested to is what do you think this means for leaders at the organizational, neighborhood, and community and municipal level? So at that the smaller, just slightly beyond the individual, but people who are thinking at that neighborhood or that community level.
What does it mean in terms of what kind of leadership is needed?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess I've touched on it a little bit, and I don't want to seem like too much of a broken record, but I think one of the most important qualities in leadership that's necessary right now at whatever level is generosity. And I don't mean giving away things or giving out grants, obviously. I mean a generosity of spirit. And I've really found that, I've been in this role as mayor for 7 years through a lot of contentious issues, from, well, I could list them all, but I won't. The job of a leader isn't to maintain the status quo. The job of the leader is to get ready for the next 5 decades. That's how I see it. And so in Victoria over the last 7 years, we've done a lot of big moves. Made a lot of big moves that are really setting up people who will live here 5 decades from now in a good way. And there's been a lot of pushback, and sometimes, particularly on social media, but also in council meetings or in emails, and again to the neighborhood level or community level, it could be on your street or wherever. That when people come at you as a leader with anger, or upset, or things that feel hard, what I've experienced is what they want is for me, I'll just talk about me to kind of yell back or get angry back or fight back. And one of the things that I've found really effective is that generosity is completely disarming. And I'll give you an example. Before the pandemic, I had community drop-ins in my office, and we'd open up the office and make some coffee and tea, and people would come in, and anyone could come in, and they would come in as a group, and I'd go to my flip chart and say, okay, what's the agenda today? And I'd write down the agenda items, and some people came into that space really, really angry, like about, at one person, it was about bike lanes, camping in parks, you name it. And when they finished their angry rant, and when I said, tell me more, tell me a little bit more about how you feel or what you think. And then I just listened more. And by the end of those kinds of conversations, A, they didn't make their point and then storm out. They stayed and listened to the rest of the community and what the rest of the community had to say. So that's a success. But B, again, there is that opportunity to build understanding. So generosity is very difficult in the face of being met with anger or vitriol or upset. But I think it's the kind of leadership that's needed right now.
And I see a new face in the
you see,
there she is.
I am so excited.
I am so apologetic. I had this in my mind, not on my calendar, as starting in 15 minutes. So where are we?
We're here. We're present. We're so
I've had
excited.
the joys of engaging Mayor Helps in a conversation, and she's graciously quoted your book a number of times. So
Hello, Lisa. It's good to meet you.
So
Good to meet you.
we're at 1:30 now. If everybody's okay with it, I would love to turn to some of the questions. I know you had a chance to talk via email before, and so Mary, do you want to ask some of the
Sure. Yeah,
questions,
sounds
and
good.
then yeah, does that work for you, Margaret?
Yeah, although I also want to really talk about the world situation and how it's impacting us. So,
Yeah, absolutely. So
but please, Lisa, you begin.
yeah.
Okay, well, why don't we begin as we planned, which is with your poem. So Margaret wrote a poem. Margaret, Meg, how do you want me to address you?
You could call me Meg.
Meg. Okay, so Meg wrote a poem in 2005 called "I Want to Be a Ukrainian." And given and we've mentioned this already, the historic and unprecedented attack that we're all bearing witness to as a global community, I'd like to invite her to read her poem. And then after that, let's talk a little bit about how to be present as the suffering and destruction increases, not only in the Ukraine, but around the world. And Meg, maybe you could talk a little bit about how do we deal with the emotions of grief and anger, disbelief and sorrow as the world erupts in violence. And I watched you give advice in a video about taking your seat, about the importance of taking your seat and the practice of being present, of being here. And how do we do that in the face of all of this violence, and how do we grapple with that? So yeah, if you would love to share your poem with folks and then answer.
I would. And thank you, Lisa, for adapting. We all have to adapt these days, and that's one of the great skills, is not to be defeated when our plans don't come to fruition. So I wrote this poem in 2004, watching the Orange Revolution, which was the first time the Ukrainians demonstrated their incredible perseverance and spirit for claiming their right to be. Now, as we're facing today's news, which is the Russian army has orders to simply obliterate them, according to President Zelensky, this is even more important that I offer this in tribute. The Orange Revolution was created when a presidential election was deep in fraud, and the Moscow Putin had already been in office for 2 years. The Moscow-leaning candidate seemed to have won, but it was so obviously a fraudulent election. All the candidate who finally won, Yushchenko, asked people to go out into the streets and protest. And by the end of their protests, which lasted, a Supreme Court decision ruled the election fraudulent, and it was still a time when the rule of law was active. And they declared a new election to take place right after Christmas. People continued to protest until Yushchenko was declared the winner. And then he was inaugurated at the end of January 2005. And it is reported that over 18% of Ukrainians went out in protest. And so the same spirit now is being demonstrated to us moment by moment. The poem is called "I Want to Be a Ukrainian." When I come of age, when I get over being a teenager, when I take my life seriously, when I grow up, I want to be a Ukrainian. When I come of age, I want to stand happily in the cold for days beyond number, no longer numb to what I need. I want to hear my voice rise loud and clear above the icy fog, claiming myself. Here's a news report. It was day 15 of the protest, and a woman standing next to her car was being interviewed. Her car had a rooster sitting on top of it. She said, "We've woken up and we're not leaving till this rotten government is out." It is not recorded if the rooster crowed. When I get over being a teenager, when I no longer complain or accuse, when I stop blaming everybody else, when I take responsibility, I will have become a Ukrainian. Another news report. The Yushchenko supporters carried bright orange banners which they waved vigorously on slim poles. Soon after the protests began, the government sent in thugs, hoping to create violence. They also carried banners, but theirs were hung on heavy clubs that could double as weapons. When I take my life seriously, when I look directly at what's going on, when I know that the future doesn't change itself, I will be a Ukrainian. Protest that endures, Wendell Berry said, is moved by a hope far more modest than that of public success, namely, the hope of preserving qualities in one's own heart and spirit that would be destroyed by acquiescence. When I grow up and am known as a Ukrainian, I will move easily onto the streets, confident, insistent, happy to preserve the qualities of my own heart and spirit. In my maturity, I will be glad to teach you the cost of acquiescence, the price of silence, the peril of retreat. Hope, said Václav Havel, is not the conviction that something will turn out well, but the certainty that something is worth doing no matter how it turns out. I will teach you all that I have learned, the strength of fearlessness, the peace of conviction, the strange source of hope, and I will die well, having been a Ukrainian. So what this time can raise for us, and it's important that we're together right now, and I'm so sad that I screwed up the time, but maybe we can stay longer. I certainly can. What this time raises for us is not just deep sorrow, grief, fear, rage, but it also raises the question of who do we choose to be? Now, the book I wrote in 2017, that was the title, Who Do We Choose to Be? Because I believe that every one of us needs to make a choice of how we will engage with this time. And why I'm happy that you're with me, Lisa, is that for me, the work has to be local. The only possibility of health and change, no matter what we're dealing with, when we're dealing with global issues like climate, the work still is local preparedness and mitigation and resources to support post-disaster. When we're working on issues of freedom, of justice, the work is local, even though the issues are global. One of the true realities of this time is we cannot change the global systems. They have emerged. You cannot change an emergent system by working backwards. You start over. You start over with value-based, ethical-based behaviors, and that's why you can do that in a local community, even though it's increasingly difficult. And we originally were going to talk about this era of conflict that is tearing us apart. Yes, it is. And one of the questions I had for you, Lisa, was when there is this terrorizing situation in Ukraine, getting worse moment by moment, does that outbreak of compassion among the populace, the population of Victoria, does that create a possibility that people will come to their senses and stop fighting locally? What do you think about that? It may be too early to tell, but that's the one piercing light that I would hope comes out of our great sorrow and desperation for Ukraine?
Well, it's a really interesting question, and this may be my opportunity to. I alluded before you got on to these freedom convoys that keep showing up. So, in terms of coming together locally around the Ukrainian conflict, absolutely. In small ways, we've lit up City Hall yellow and blue. We've got the Ukrainian flag flying. I issued a statement that was read at a rally on the weekend. We actually, interestingly, have a sister city in Russia. And so we're determining now what to do about that. But I guess, wouldn't it be great if this conflict made us turn to more peace at home? Yet this weekend we're going to have 500 or 1,000 or 2,000 honking trucks showing up to protest for freedom, and it's just I do quite honestly feel like saying, like, if you want to protest for freedom, then don blue and yellow flags and honk for that. And so it puts into question in my mind our ability to empathize and recognize that even though there are vaccine mandates and these kinds of things, which certainly do have some negative impacts on some people, relatively speaking, we're very free here. So I would say I'm not that optimistic that the war is going to change how we behave at home, unfortunately. Except that there is on the flip side, there is a real rallying of support right now around Ukrainian Canadians in Victoria. So yes to that too.
Yeah. So let's just explore this. I do want to get to how you all deal with your emotions at this time, and it also as a way of supporting you, Lisa, and other leaders at this time. But what we're seeing here is an outbreak of rage and self-protection, which always happens when human species is under fear. We go back into you being human animals, not human beings. We lose all the qualities of our frontal lobes, our awareness, our moral reasoning, our consciousness, our ability to care for others. Those qualities disappear under threat. People move into survival, self-protection. I mean, I hesitated. I didn't use the word freedom a few moments ago because it's become an incoherent word, really. What is freedom? Is it just doing what the hell I want with no thought for other people? Or is it what the Ukrainians are giving their lives for at this very moment?
Mm-hmm.
Willing to die as a Ukrainian rather than live as a subjugated Russian. So, those of us who want to stay involved, who want to contribute, we are not going to change the trucker's mentality. We're not going to change this outlandish, incomprehensible, unhuman behavior now that is all on individual self-protection. We're not going to lessen the fear because we can't reach people anymore. I mean, I'm just going to lay it out, folks, in all of its brutal reality. Because, you and I, Tamarack Institute, how long have we been working on conversation as a process? My book on conversations, Turning to One Another, the subtitle was Restoring Hope to the Future through using our rational, spiritual beingness of being human. That's not available to us any longer. We're not having conversations. It's more than even echo chambers. We're each in a cave where we can only see dimly, and it's our view of reality that we see, and we're only talking to people who validate that. So what is our work then? First of all, we accept the reality. That's, for me, to get past denial, to get past false hopes of what might be possible. Yes, we can be inspired at this very moment by the Ukrainian people and what they're doing. That is a look into reality, the reality of the human spirit, but the reality of aggression as well. They go together, right? So at this time, I think the first thing for all of you to do, this is my total work these days, is focused on, can we look truthfully at what's going on, free ourselves from the blinders of hope or optimism, really be able to take in what's happening, and then make a choice. Make a choice to move into these situations using our full human qualities, our consciousness, our awakeness, our longing to help other people. So we move from self-protection, which is the survival mode of the majority of people now as the fear increases, and we move into a path of service. Who can I help now? I'm not going to change this world. The world is changed. The world has changed, not through our good efforts, but through these deep dynamics. I'm speaking very briefly about things I have written about in detail, so you can go to my website and especially look at current thinking. But who do we choose to be? And part of that ability to choose to be of service to others at this time is based on our ability to calm our fear, our reactive natures, and
Frozen.
other people.
There we go. You were frozen for just a moment.
Okay. I'm going to choose to act on behalf of other people. That's what will make a difference. That is what is meaningful at this time. But we can't react from fear. We can't react from anger and rage. We have to learn that that reaction is to be expected, and then we have to settle ourselves down, come back into ourselves to discover this interior stillness and presence that is so easily available when we're not all frantically reactive. So learning to pause, learning to meditate, learning to just calm oneself is a critical skill, because only then, I could do this neuroscience, I can do this spiritually. Only then are we turning back on our great human capacities, which are all in the frontal lobes. I prefer a more spiritual interpretation, but the neuroscience is full on explaining that as well. Do you have any comments, Elisa, at this time? I will
Sure.
talk about taking our seat, so
Yeah.
I'll just put that on, post-it that will come later.
Yeah, I do have a question and a comment, I guess a series of both. Really interested in this notion of, or this practice of just being present, just sitting with what is. And maybe you could talk a little bit more about that and give a little bit more advice, because I know that probably all of the 400 people on this in this meeting and the others who will watch it have a myriad of things competing for their attention every single moment. And so what advice can you give us as leaders how to not be distracted, how to just that very simple ability to be present means not being distracted. How do we do that when there's everything competing for our attention all the time?
That's a great question, because the answer is so simple. Do you like who you are as this overwhelmed, distracted, increasingly anxious self? That's the first choice. First, you notice its impact on you, your health, your personal health, the health of your relationships, your level of patience, your level of generosity, your level of being willing to stay in the craziness. So I just spoke about very deep, generic human capacities. We are generous. We can be cooperative. We want to be together. We are a clan species. And what is destroying our human beingness is the way we are living our lives. So if you want to continue to watch your health and your relationships and your sense of purpose deteriorate and decay, you just keep doing what you're doing. You know this to be true. So this is the first choice. You have to choose to create time and find a practice that takes you out of the distraction and gets you into your center, into your true, still nature, which we all have at our core.
Mhm.
I don't think there is anything better, I know this to be true, than a regular meditation practice.
Yeah, even just 10 minutes every morning.
Absolutely. And the purpose of meditation is to learn to watch how your mind is, not to get rid of thoughts. It's the function of the brain is to think, to generate thoughts. Like the function of the heart is to pump blood, the function of the brain is to constantly produce thoughts. But when you're quiet, you can watch them rather than follow them. And that gives you the capacity when you're in a meeting, when you're in a difficult conversation, to actually notice your instantaneous reaction, your quick judgment, and to not act from that. That's why the pause is taught by so many teachers. That's why if we just create a little bit of space between somebody said something to me, I'm deeply offended by it. That happens a lot, right? Or I read something in the news and I'm in instant sadness and distress. If you can watch that reaction, then you don't react. You respond with a greater level of intelligence because you have taken that moment to just see, oh, well, this idiot just said something terribly offensive to me. I want to strike back, but I don't want to add to aggression in this room right now, in this conversation. So I will pause and I will try another way that has less aggression in it as my reply to this person who really did say something very offensive or idiotic. So please notice I'm not talking about being silent at all. I'm talking about being more effective in how we respond with sanity and compassion and our higher human consciousness, how we respond, even though we are in situations that constantly make us angry or sad. So meditation is the premier practice here, but there are other things available to you should you hesitate to take that good advice about meditation. And as Lisa said, it's 10 minutes a day. You'll find great benefit from it. But also, do contemplative things like go for a walk without your ears plugged up with music or a podcast. Just go for a walk and be in silence or listen to the sounds around you. Find peaceful places in your environment. That's easy in Victoria. Find just time to really, it literally is unwinding, de-stressing, because you reduce the impact of the outer noise, the outer voices. Take time just to sit under a tree Feel the tree against your back, feel the bark, ask it how old it is. Develop relationships with the living world that is so present and so beautiful on the island there. But you have to choose this. You have to take control and notice that if you don't, you're going to get sicker, you're going to get into more and more problematic relationships, and there's no good end to this. So this is the time to really exercise choice. First, for your own inner peace and stability. And for me, the second reason is as important. How then can you serve other people? How then can you do better work?
Thank you. That's really wonderful wisdom to share with all of us. I do want to come back to one of the things that you said when you were making your previous comments, that we need to free ourselves from the blinders of hope and optimism. My back went up a little bit when you said freeing ourselves from the blinders of hope and optimism. So maybe you could talk a little bit more about that and share your thoughts. Why are hope and optimism blinders, and what kind of posture should we have instead of those?
Actually, in other pieces, I've written a lot about hope and its promised companion, fear or disappointment. So I'm speaking about the kind of hope where we give our all so that something good will come as a result of our actions. And then we experience this intimacy between hope and fear, because when those hopes, expectations do not come to fruition, we're left with terrible disappointment. I mean, just think about it in your own experience. Or think about the Ukrainians. Until Monday, they were still blaming the American intelligence for warmongering and saying, no, Russia's not going to invade us. They love Ukrainians. They won't invade us. And now they understand that that was a hope that blinded them to the necessity of getting ready as we would for any incoming disaster. But hope and fear are two sides of the same emotional state. We want something to improve. We want something to be of great benefit. We want to see positive change. That is the basis of what motivates us to do our work. But it's a dangerous basis, because when we don't succeed, when events far beyond our control, whether it's climate crisis weather or war or the failure of leaders over which we have no control, when those things happen, we go down in despair. That feels like a normal practice, but there is something beyond hope and fear. And it's a commitment, as the Václav Havel quote that I read, I'll repeat it. The leader of the Czech Republic after Yugoslavia freed itself from Soviet rule. He wrote, he was a brilliant playwright and poet, and he became president of the Czech Republic. Just a gorgeous being. And he wrote a lot about hope. And he said, hope is not the conviction that something will turn out well, but the certainty that something is worth doing no matter how it turns out.
Mm-hmm.
That's where we need to be. We need to be clear that what we're giving our energy and love to is worth it no matter the result.
Mm-hmm.
And in this objective culture, in this set your goals and work incrementally to achieve your goals, in that culture, what Havel and what I am now adding to Havel's beautiful statement is choose the work that feels of ultimate meaning to you because it serves other people. It doesn't just satisfy you. It serves a need. And then no matter what happens, you will find incredible satisfaction from it. So beyond hope and fear is the place of I do the work because it's my work to do, and I can't not do it.
That's
Find
really
that
beautiful.
place.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. And someone commented in the chat, I see that letting go of hope also means letting go of fear, and what a gift that is. So
Yes.
thank you for that gift. I want to check in with the Tamarack folks. We are past the hour. What's your feeling? I could ask a couple more questions, or
So I want to interfere here. What I've read in the chat is that some people who had to go are looking forward to us continuing, and then they'll get the video of it, correct? Justin?
Absolutely. Yeah, I didn't want to interrupt, but my take is if you two are still happy to talk for a few more minutes and you're both available, then
I need to go on just out of penance for these good people. So please let us keep going.
Okay, I've got until 11:10, and then
Okay.
so did you want to, I mean, I want to ask you one of the questions that I had to answer in your absence that you'll do a much better job than I would, and then, you know, whatever else that you'd like to share as well. It goes back to systems thinking, and this is something that you've been talking about and working on for a long time. And how can we as leaders work in systems and on systems, seeing the interconnections between very, very disparate things like climate change and the labor shortage and the war in the Ukraine and the housing crisis, and these are all connected. How do we disentangle and think about working in a system from our own little, as you said, a local part of the world? So I would love to, and I'm sure everyone here would love to hear your insights on that.
Well, I think my insights will be very depressing too. We understand interconnectedness, but people who are protesting for their freedom, people who need good housing, people who don't have enough food, people who don't have, we don't have enough healthcare professionals. We see the interconnection of all these issues, but people who are either suffering or protesting only want that issue solved. So you can't solve them in an interconnected way. And I think, but I'm going to be very humble in what I'm saying here, Lisa, because I believe that leaders are in an almost intolerable position because of this very dynamic. Everyone wants their own issue dealt with, and to hell with everybody else. We work on whatever issue, as a leader, you work on whatever issue you can, okay? You understand the root causes, you understand the interconnections, but really, we just have to work with the opportunity in front of us, whatever the issue is. And we just start with that. And then if we're lucky, if you're reelected, then we follow it to the next place where something can be done. But this environment is so fragile and so brutal for leaders right now. That I think you just do this is Teddy Roosevelt's maxim that I now use all the time. Do what you can, where you are, with what you have. Mm-hmm. And like the Ukrainians, you will do your very best, and you've tried your very best, and actually the outcomes now are not a product of the quality of your leadership. They just aren't. Mm-hmm. So go for it. Go for it.
Yeah, I think that's really important advice for all leaders, is that, whether you're working at the community level or the city level, or if you're doing the work that needs to be done, the outcomes will be what they are, but you're throwing your whole centered and present self into the work.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. And you need companions, you need support, you need allies. So we need to stay together and support good leaders and support one another, because this is a very vicious, brutal environment that you are doing your very best. Your very best. Yeah. And after you go, Lisa, I think that would be a time I'd like to stay on, Justin, and teach everyone the practice of taking your seat. That would be a good use of me.
Sure, that's I mean, that's up to Tamarack. May I ask just one more question? I want to
Yeah.
end with this, and then I watched your taking your seat video, so I know what to do, and everyone else will really bet. I mean, it's extraordinarily simple, and thank you for sharing that. One of the last questions I wanted to ask you, you've said that you have an unshakable confidence in the human spirit and in the spirit of all life. And maybe just talk a little bit about, despite everything you've just said, that the challenging situations we're in, and it's very difficult, what gives you that unshakable confidence in the human spirit?
It's just watching people rise to the occasion. It in no way, when I make that statement, I mean, that was also my definition of sane leaders have unshakable confidence that people can be creative, generous, and kind. But the can be is the questionable part, because we don't know what conditions are present for people to manifest their generosity and their brave human spirits. So that conviction is, that certainty is that the human spirit exists and it cannot be vanquished, but it doesn't necessarily change things for the better. So we're seeing that right now in Ukraine. They will stand up. They will not surrender. They probably will be massacred. But that's the human spirit that never succumbs, that never gives up. Now, the spirit of life is a very different set of life is working out according to its own laws and dynamics, and we've known those dynamics for generations, and now we are reaping the harvest of our deciding we didn't need to follow the laws. But the spirit of life for me also is one of welcoming. So you go into a forest, an old growth forest on the island, and you will feel the spirit of life. And you will gain comfort from those tall, enduring trees. And so we can tune into the spirit of life, but the human spirit is not capable of being vanquished.
Beautiful. Well, thank you for that.
Capable of being distorted, but not vanquished.
Not vanquished. Well, thank you. This has been unexpected, the way that first they get me, then they get both of us, now they get you. So I'm going to head off and run to where I have to go next.
So you're an adaptive leader to the max right now, Lisa, aren't you?
That's what I learned during the pandemic. Thank you to the Tamarack folks for having me, and Meg, it's been a real pleasure.
Thank you so much,
Thank
Mayor
you,
House.
Lisa. All right. So for all of you, whether you're watching this on video or live, this relates to how we find center, how we find our inner strength, which is in our bodies, not just something we imagine or talk ourselves into in our minds. I have a deep conviction, based on my own experience, that our bodies want to support us. You know, in so many cases, especially when we're ill, the body becomes an enemy. But in this practice is a way of tuning in to the strength that is carried in every body, no matter how painful it is. So the first thing about taking our seat is having the courage to declare ourselves as, I'm here, I want to be present. And we show that in our posture. And I believe that posture is about 80% of the resource, 80% of the capacity we have to be present. You can't just decide to be present. You can't just decide, even if you've been well trained, to be a good listener. You have to be present to be a good listener. And this is a way of gaining presence. So It's called Taking Our Seat. It's from the Shambhala Warrior Teachings. And the first thing to do is connect with your butt. So, assumedly, you're sitting on a chair of some kind. Just wiggle back and forth and feel your sit bones. Even in German, they're called sit bones, so that's good. Just feel them. Wiggle back and forth. You are placing your energy, you're placing your attention into this ultimate ground of our butts. Okay, and then have your feet flat on the floor. We're going to talk about earth energy, and earth energy is available to us even if we're in a high-rise building. So with your feet connected to the floor and your butt firmly in the chair, now also just straighten up your spine as much as you can comfortably. This is not, sitting prim and proper. This is about just letting your spine assume a position of strength. Even if you suffer from a bad back, which I have suffered from for about 52 years, I know my spine is there to support me. So take as comfortable and erect posture as is possible. And don't lean back against anything for this practice now. You certainly don't want to slump, but you also don't want to get lost in a comfy chair. So with your butt firmly in the seat and your feet firmly on the floor and your spine comfortably erect, just close your eyes now. And we're first going to focus on your head. So let your head feel lifted up naturally. None of this is forced. This is all natural. Let your head rise, feel that it's rising naturally. And tuck your chin in a little bit. That helps lengthen the neck. And just feel how this is in your body now. You're grounded with your feet. You're grounded in your seat. Your spine is erect so that you feel its strength. And your head is open and feels strong, actually. Now, this is taking your seat, but I want to go deeper with you because there's also the possibility of using the energy of earth and sky and to use your body as a connector of this. So with your feet, still with your eyes closed, with your feet on the floor, visualize that your feet are accepting and welcoming the incoming energy of earth, and that this energy now moves up through your legs. Slowly but clearly, you're feeling this earth energy rise into you, and it is rising through your legs and into your butt. That's true groundedness, however you want to think about ground and groundedness. But then let it keep rising. Let it come up through your spine, through your belly, till it rises to the level of your heart chakra, the heart center, which is also mind center in Sanskrit and Tibetan cultures. It's a heart mind there. But let the earth energy rise to that point and just let it rest there. Again, feel the strength that is coming into your body through your own posture and through this infusion of earth energy. And then go above your head and let the energy of space, the energy of sky, enter your body through your crown and just come down very slowly through your head and spine and meet the earth energy in your heart-mind center. In doing this, you become a process for connecting two sources of energy that are always there and that are always available to us. So just feel that for a moment. Now, you don't have to do this as consciously or slowly as I just led you through. You can do this when you're entering a difficult conversation. You can just straighten up and feel you have this energy in you. And if you'd open your eyes now, I want to show you something. As I said, I believe that posture is 80% of the way we gain a sense of presence. And the story I'm going to tell you involves a CEO of one of the largest community-based NGOs, nonprofits in the United States. She was under attack, under vicious attack. She was, I think, she's one of the top 3 leaders in my estimation that I've ever worked with or supported. But she was under attack by competitive NGOs who wanted her funds, political leaders who didn't want her around. And so I was calling her. This was before texting. I was calling her almost every day just to check on her. And in one call, she was so down and out. And we were talking about what she could do as simple next steps, not big plans, but simple next steps. That's a big strategy also. Just do the next thing. But at the end of the conversation, I introduced this image to her, which came from one of my teachers, and which I said, please don't be a wilted flower. And she started laughing almost hysterically because she said, Meg, the whole time that I have been on this call with you, I've had my head on my desk. So don't be a wilted flower. When you are in a meeting, when you're losing your patience, when you're starting to get angry, when you're despairing at any time, when you're watching the news, pay attention and take your seat, because it is from this strength that you can open to the world, that you can be unafraid to open your heart and take in the absolute terrorizing insanity that's going on everywhere now. You have a strong back and an open front, an open-heartedness, but you can't do that unless you consciously take your seat. So I offer this to you as a practice that I know works brilliantly. And anytime you start to feel that you're getting lost or you're getting overwhelmed, take your seat and you will see the benefit. I'm glad we had this extra time. I'm not fully repented, I must say. I haven't done anything that's stupid in quite a long time, but I hope this provides benefit to you all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Meg. Right before you came on, Mayor Helps reminded us that people want a reason to come. They want to show up. And I think I just feel so fortunate that we were able to sort of be in our more natural state of being together. And things are messy. And I think that part of what this kind of reflects on is that. And I'm just so happy that we were able to hear from you today and hear from Mayor Helps as well, because I think I said at the beginning that we're in a time where we're so fragmented, and we really do need to sort of to learn how to take those breaths, to stay calm, and to think through how we can make the change that we're capable of making. And I think that means thinking about the whole system and understanding the whole system, but but coming to that understanding about systems and the complexity of the world that we're in means understanding that there's the certain parts that we're able to do, and it's those little changes that we're each able to make that can lead to much bigger changes. So for me, this whole conversation, and even just that exercise and caring for ourselves that you just took us through with taking our seat, I think is just so important. And so I just want to express my gratitude, even though she had to leave, to both Mayor Helps and yourself. So this was really wonderful. And I think Heather wanted to have a reflection as well. So I'll turn to her.
I do have a reflection, and I have to say that, Meg, that session you did with me reduced my heart attack and my stress from the very beginning of this session. So that was that. You know, you're all forgiven. I'm all calm and relaxed. But my reflection is personally. As a mom, as a community volunteer in my little community, this session made me realize that leadership is not something that I need to read a book about and I have to go to school for. I've been trying to figure out, how do I be a leader? And I've had it all along. Like what I got from this was that it's inside me, right? And so, you know, some of the things I was reflecting is, how do I want to be in my community, and how do I listen to my community, and what is my inner presence as people are speaking to me, and you know, do I like who I am right now, so that I can be responsive in a respectful way, and not in an aggressive way. And so and you know, do what I can with what I have. So I use those eyes because this is a time that I reflected on who I am, and a leader. And as a mom, I'm a leader as a mom, right? And I'm a leader as a volunteer in my community. And so this was really, it hit me personally. And I'm going to reflect. I'm going to reflect on it. And I'm going to check my language. I'm going to check my presence. And I'm excited. I'm excited about this newfound knowledge I have about myself. And so thank you so much.
That's wonderful. I again want to refer everyone to my website, margaretwheatley.com. That website was designed as a support, as a library, but there's a new tab at the top called Current Thinking, where you can listen in more depth to what I'm doing and what I'm thinking. There's a few podcasts and video interviews with me, because we need, just as you had this realization, Heather, this is very deep personal work. Mm-hmm. It's not abstract. It's not learning systems thinking. It's not learning about leadership any longer. It's about, how do I show up? And the only way I can show up as a peaceful presence is to learn to know myself, and to learn that, and make a commitment. I don't want to be a reactive firebomb out there. I also don't want to be totally depressed by the world situation. Justin, I'm going to ask you to stop calling it a mess. It's much greater than a mess. It's much greater than a mess. And we have to come to terms with that. This is the reality that needs us, but we need to really understand what's going on, and then not get taken out by deep despair, which I think is a natural consequence of tuning in, but you don't have to stay in despair. And it's also, we don't need to stay in sorrow. That is a constant, but we can still choose who we want to be for this world, in our local communities, with our families, in our relationships. And that's why the work is so personal at this point.
I think this is Tamarack's longest webinar. And we still have like 190 folks on here. So
Yes.
Yeah, so thank you so much, Meg, for joining us.
Very welcome. Thank you.
And we will send out the recording. We will do some editing and cutting down and put it together in a nice little package. The chat box is a wealth of beauty, and so I'm going to download it. I'm going to clean it up and put some thought into it, and I will share it with everybody on the call. Because, you know, as much as there was beauty between you and Mayor Helps, there was a lot of beauty in the chat box, and great quotes and knowledge and story sharing. And that's all part of this. And that's a wrap.